Recent tragedies like the Astroworld Festival and Seoul Halloween incident have been a dark reminder of just how dangerous crowds can be. Imagine being pushed on all sides so that when your chest falls as you exhale, there is not enough room for it to rise again. When crowd densities reach 6 people or more per square meter, bodies get pushed together so tightly that it can cause internal hemorrhaging, asphyxiation, and ultimately, death. Concerts, sports games, and other crowded events can turn deadly when the right crowd security measures are not in place. If you're claustrophobic, an introvert, or just don't like crowds, I can assure you, this is not the way you want to go. In this video, I will be discussing 4 true stories of times that overcrowding became a death sentence for unsuspecting event-goers. Number 1. Akashi Fireworks Festival. What does the crowd security guard do? They don't do anything. Those were the words said by the Akashi police chief moments before he reduced the number of staff assigned to crowd management to just 16. 16 people to manage a crowd of more than 150,000. This negligent attitude towards crowd control would turn what should have been a fun summer night at the Akashi Fireworks Festival into a horrific tragedy. In Japan, festivals, or matsuri, are a staple of the hot summer months. Roads close, lanterns are hung, and streets come alive as thousands of people of all ages gather to share in the festivities. In 2001, Akashi City was the location of a particularly popular summer festival. People gathered to visit food stands, play games, and watch performances of traditional music and dances. Without a doubt, one of the main draws of the festival was the fireworks show. Crowds of spectators gathered from all over to watch the fireworks display light up the sky on the shore of Okura Beach. When the fireworks show came to an end, thousands simultaneously began to make their exit from the area. Many of them headed towards the nearby Asagiri station to catch a train home. The only direct link from the beach to the station was a pedestrian bridge that crossed over a busy road. At the station, trains only came every 5 minutes or so, and only a limited number of people could fit onto the train at once. This created a long line that soon became backed up through the entire length of the bridge. Tired from the night's festivities and eager to get home, some became impatient and tried to push forward, further compacting the already dense crowd. For those already in the tunnel, there was no option to turn back to escape the crush that was rapidly forming. People were packed in so tightly that they could not move or breathe. The crowd density eventually reached 15 people per square meter. For reference, a safe crowd density is considered 2 or less people per square meter. The plastic walls of the 19.8-foot-wide bridge trapped the heat and humidity of hundreds of bodies inside, creating a greenhouse effect. First-hand accounts of the incident described the inside of the pedestrian bridges as hot as a steam bath, and the walls prevented any circulation of air. Survivor of the crush, Shimomura Seiji, recalled seeing children begin to faint as the heat and pressure intensified inside the pedestrian bridge. Fearing for his son, 2-year-old Tomohito, he had him stand between the handrail and the wall, hoping it would alleviate some of the pressure of the crowd. As Shimomura struggled to stay on his feet, he heard a snapping sound and realized that the weight of the bodies pressing in around him had broken his ribs. It was around this point that people began to collapse in a wave. As one person fell, others leaning against them collapsed on top of them. While Shimomura tried desperately to protect his son, he was separated from him in the chaos. When he was finally able to make it back to the section of guardrail he had placed him behind, he found that the weight of the crowd had bent and deformed the metal. Tragically, it had not been enough to protect him. and young Tomohito had been crushed to death. He was one of 11 people who died in this tragedy, 9 of whom were young children and 2 elderly women. 183 others sustained varying degrees of injury. One of the survivors of the incident was Yamashita Shoma, who at the time was just 2 months old. He was separated from his mother on the Akashi Bridge amidst the dense crowd. Fortunately, a kind elderly woman, 70-year-old Kusake Ritsuko, noticed the unattended baby stroller and took action. She fought her way through the crowd, making it all the way to the infant child. She was able to lift him from his stroller and pass him off to a taller man who held him above the crowd to prevent him from being crushed. This brave act saved the young boy's life, but tragically, Ritsuko did not survive. Although immensely grateful that her baby had made it out alive, the boy's mother was burdened with guilt and feared Ritsuko's husband would blame her for what happened.
人混みの中に赤ちゃん連れて行くなんてってやっぱり周りからも怒られたので、やっぱり連れて行ってなかったら律子さんもね亡くなることなかったかもしれないし。
When she met Ritsuko's husband, though, he embraced and loved the child his wife had given her life to protect, treating him like his own grandson.
バイバイするぞ、ね、バイバイするぞ、また会おうぜ。
すごく喜んでもらえて、会いたかったって言って抱っこさせてって言われて、ありがとうございましたしか言えませんでした。
They maintained a close relationship through the following years, until the elderly man eventually passed away. Now, Shoma is fully grown, but he and his mother still visit the shrine that was built at the scene of the incident to pay their respects. In the aftermath, during investigations into what had caused the disaster, it was revealed that the security plans for the Akashi Fireworks Festival had been copied from another event. This event, the Countdown Fireworks Festival, which had been held half a year earlier, had hosted only 50,000 people and had run into its own crowd management issues, with severe congestion resulting in injuries. Even so, the plans were reused for the Akashi Festival, which hosted somewhere between 150,000 and 200,000 people, well over 3 times more than the plans were intended for. The plans that had already had issues with just 50,000. Miscommunication between personnel further escalated the incident, as security was continuously directing people onto the bridge even after people inside were banging on the walls and screaming for help. Through a lengthy legal battle, 5 individuals were prosecuted and found guilty of causing death or injury due to professional negligence. The police chief who reduced the number of people managing the crowd and department heads who neglected their duty to prevent the incident managed to escape punishment. However, because of this incident, security was re-examined across the country, and other events such as fireworks festivals and concerts were also found to have poor security. Since the devastating events of the 2001 Akashi Bridge incident, Japan has not had another major crowd disaster. Number 2. The Who Concert Crush. How did 11 young people die trying to get into a concert? This was the question that everyone was asking. While some claimed it was a wild stampede of rock fanatics, the reality was far more complicated and far more tragic. It was a cold winter day in Cincinnati, Ohio, but that didn't dampen the mood of the thousands of rock fans gathered outside the Riverfront Coliseum. They drank, chatted, laughed, and sang as they waited to be granted entry to the venue, where, in a few hours, British rock band The Who were scheduled to perform a highly anticipated concert. Weeks before, all 18,348 tickets for the concert had sold out less than 2 hours after becoming available, and now the day of the show had finally arrived. Eager fans waited for the doors to open, hoping that by arriving early, they could get the best possible spots. Around 80% of the tickets sold for the concert were festival seating, a type of general admission ticket that was first come, first served for spots closest to the stage. Fans with festival seating tickets would camp out hours in advance and rush in when the doors finally opened. Because of this, the ticketing policy was a controversial one and had been eliminated at several similar venues in the US due to safety concerns. 2 years earlier, during a Led Zeppelin concert with festival seating at the very same venue, a crush against the entrance doors had injured dozens of people. Even so, the warning signs went unheeded, and festival seating tickets continued to be sold because they generated good profit for the venue. The Who were not scheduled to start until 8 p.m., but concertgoers began arriving shortly after noon. Not only was it standard for festival seating ticket holders to arrive early, but many had also heard from a local radio station that they would be granted admission starting at 3. By 3 o'clock, the doors did not open, but the crowd had swelled into the thousands, and police had been called in to maintain order. By 5 o'clock, near the doorways, it had become so tightly packed that people were struggling to breathe. One survivor remembered seeing people with their heads tilted upwards, mouths open as they gasped for air. When the doors finally did open, it was only 2 at the far right of the main entrance. 18,000 fans were expected to filter through this single set of doors and present their tickets to staff. Police tried to convince the show's promoters to open more doors, but their request was denied. Organizers claimed that they were short-staffed and did not have enough ticket takers on duty. Soon enough, checking tickets would become the least of their concerns, though. Fans could hear music starting inside, and many believed this to be the sound of the concert beginning. The music was actually from a movie trailer which played before the concert started, but they didn't know this, and believing the Who were already taking to the stage, the crowd surged forward towards the only open entrance. Concert-goers were lifted off their feet and carried by the surge.
I literally seen people being pushed up in the air and walking on people into the door, and a guy grabbing on the awning before the door and swinging himself into the building.
The pressure of the crowd became so intense that the plexiglass windows of the closed doors eventually shattered. Bodies came pouring in through the broken glass, until a massive pile of fallen people had formed near the entrance. Some tried to help the fallen, but were pushed by the crowd and ended up forced to either fall on top of them or walk over them. Those who were further from the doors did not realize the severity of the situation ahead of them and continued to push forward in excitement, unable to hear the screams of those ahead over the roar of the crowd.
I don't know if you've seen any pictures of the clothing stacks that were at the side of each door that had been opened. When these people came through that door, it was like they're being put through a hamburger masher, literally, and their clothes are being peeled off of them as they're coming through the door.
News reports immediately following the event described it as a stampede, and often claimed drugs, alcohol, and rock and roll were the main causes for the disaster.
The stampede began when thousands of fans burst through doors to get unreserved seats. A youth outside said they were ready to kill to get a good view of the concert.
In reality, while many were trampled trying to get into the Colosseum, it was more often because people were trying to escape the crush near the entrance, not because they were trying to get the best seats. It wasn't until approximately 7:45 p.m. that the crowd dispersed enough for police to begin to process the extent of the damage. Between 50 and 75 people were treated on the scene, and another 25 had to be transported to the hospital for treatment. Tragically, for 11 young people in the crowd that day, there was nothing police or first responders could do to save them. In each case, the cause of death was determined to be compressive asphyxia. The entrance to the Colosseum was covered in broken glass, shoes, hats, wallets, and thousands of bloody footprints. Despite the carnage, there was concern with how the crowd might react to a cancellation, so the organizers and the fire chief made a call to go on with the show. As the Who performed, they had no idea that just outside was this horrific scene, where 11 of their fans had just died.
Came off stage and Bill Curbishley came in and said, I've got some really bad news to tell you, and started to explain it to us. And I went through two phases, one was, of course, tremendous upset and concern, but the other was incredible anger that we had been performing while this was going on.
In the wake of the disaster, the city of Cincinnati banned festival seating, and in 2010, a memorial was created to commemorate those who died. After 43 years, the Who finally returned to the city to play another show, which they dedicated to the victims of the 1979 tragedy. Number 3. Estadio Nacional disaster. The darkest day in soccer history happened inside the walls of the Estadio Nacional in Peru. A controversial call by the referee, a pitch invasion, and a public display of police brutality created what has gone down in history as the worst stadium disaster of all time. On May 24, 1964, Peru was playing Argentina in an important match at the Estadio Nacional in the Peruvian capital of Lima. Confidence was high among the home team, but Peru needed a draw at least against Argentina, as their spot in the 1964 Tokyo Olympics was at stake. The match attracted a crowd of close to 60,000, which, at the time, was over 5% of Lima's population. Passions were running high, and despite steep ticket prices, the stadium sold out, and the stands were packed to capacity with excited fans. For much of the game, the score remained 0-0, the atmosphere tense as both teams struggled to break the deadlock. No goals were scored in the first half of the game, but in the second half Argentina scored, taking the lead. As the last remaining minute of the match ticked down, the pressure mounted. With just 6 minutes remaining, Victor Kilo Lobaton, a Peruvian player, raised his foot to block, and the ball rebounded into the goal, scoring an equalizer at a crucial moment. The home crowd erupted into cheers, but unfortunately, their celebrations were short-lived. The Uruguayan referee, Angel Eduardo Pazos, disallowed the goal, ruling that the Peruvian player had committed a foul by raising his foot too high. This decision sparked outrage among fans, many of whom perceived there to be a bias on the part of the referee, given Uruguay's close proximity to Argentina. Shouts of anger filled the stadium, and 2 men even climbed over barriers and entered the pitch to confront the referee directly. One of them was Matias Rojas, a local man often referred to as El Negro Bomba, who was known for invading the pitch at previous games to dispute calls he disagreed with. He was quickly apprehended by the police and led off the field, but the second man, Edoberto Cuenca, was met with a much harsher response. He was brutally beaten by officers with batons, kicked, punched, and even had police dogs set on him, all despite never posing any threat. This entire scene played out right in front of thousands of already riled-up spectators, and the display of intense brutality caused the crowd's anger to boil over. One fan who had been present recalled, "Our very own policemen were kicking him and beating him as if he were the enemy. This is what raised everybody's anger, including mine. People in the stands began to hurl anything they could get their hands on towards the field. Stones, bottles, coins, seat cushions, and shoes rained down on the pitch. A large number of spectators surged forward, tearing down the wire barrier separating the stands from the pitch and flooding onto the field to confront the police. Some even began to set fire to benches and terraces around the stadium, and others tore bricks from the walls to throw. Seeing how things were quickly spiraling out of control, the two teams and the referee made a hasty exit as spectators and police began to clash. Officers began firing dozens of canisters of tear gas into the crowd and shooting in the air in an attempt to stop the riot. Unsurprisingly, this caused a panic, and thousands of people surged towards the exits in a desperate attempt to escape. Some were pushed to the ground and trampled in the stampede, but those who made it to the exit tunnels found themselves faced with an even more terrifying situation. Only 2 of the 5 exit gates were open, the other 3 sealed by corrugated steel shutters. Whether these gates were closed because police were trying to prevent rioters from leaving the scene, or because they were simply unattended by staff remains a matter of speculation. Either way, the result was catastrophic. Within minutes, the exit tunnels leading to the closed shutters were packed with bodies. Tragically, in many cases, it was those who fled first, who wanted to avoid the violence the most, who suffered the worst fate. People inside the 3 dead-end exit tunnels were crushed with no way to escape. The pressure of the crowd was so intense that many were lifted completely off their feet, trapped in the solid mass of humans, unable to move or breathe. Some lost consciousness, but were held upright by the pressure of the crowd. In the tunnels, people were piled against the gates, injured, struggling to breathe, and crushed among the living, dead, and dying. Many asphyxiated or suffered internal hemorrhaging, and those who survived could do nothing but try to breathe, stay conscious, and wait for the crush to alleviate. Eventually, the sheer pressure of the bodies caused the steel shutters to give way, and they burst open and outward, sending hundreds of people, both living and dead, spilling out into the street. As ambulances converged on the stadium, people continued to riot in the surrounding streets in response to the police brutality, setting homes and businesses on fire and clashing with local police. In the chaos there was looting, and reportedly at least 100 cars were stolen. At the same time, 21 prisoners escaped from a nearby correctional facility amidst the mayhem. It took hours for authorities to finally regain control of the situation. By the time they did, the official death toll had reached 328, with over 500 more injured. Nearby hospitals were quickly overwhelmed, with one hospital alone reporting 140 dead brought in. Distraught family members of people who had attended the game crowded in, blocking hospital entrances. In some cases, hospitals ran out of space and had to set up temporary morgues on the lawn outside. Here, friends and relatives had to endure the horrific task of scanning through the rows of the dead to identify their loved ones. To quell the unrest in Lima, the government ordered the suspension of civil liberties, enforced a state of emergency, and imposed a modified form of martial law for a month as they dealt with continuous protests in the aftermath of the fateful game. The official death toll released from the incident, 328, has been debated. Eyewitnesses claim that as the situation escalated, police switched from tear gas to live ammunition, and many reported seeing people being shot and killed, both in the stadium and in the surrounding streets. The death toll of 328 accounts only for those who died in the crush, but contemporary reports estimate that the true death toll of the incident was closer to 500. Judge Benjamin Castaneda was appointed to lead an inquiry into the disaster, but his investigation faced numerous obstacles. He alleged officials were covering up evidence, claiming that bodies of gunshot victims were being hidden from the investigation. Some months after the tragedy, Castaneda was visited by an elderly man who said his 2 sons had traveled from the provinces to attend the game, but never returned. Even though he had looked for their names among the dead, he could not find them, Castaneda said. There were many other such reports of people attending the game, only to never be heard from again, and though family members scoured hospitals and morgues, they were never able to find their remains, and their names were never listed in any official reports of the dead. Castaneda went on to accuse the Interior Minister of orchestrating the pitch invasion and brutal police response in order to incite the crowd to violence, thus providing a reason for a violent crackdown. The show of strength was, he said, intended to make the people learn, with blood and tears, the risks that they ran if they challenged the authorities. This came during a turbulent time in Peru's history, in which labor disputes and worker demonstrations were present across the country, and leftist and communist forces were frequently clashing with police. Castaneda's report was dismissed despite these claims, and no further investigation occurred. Only 2 people were ever punished for the events that took place in the Estadio Nacional. One of them was the police commander who ordered the firing of tear gas into the crowd. He was imprisoned for 2.5 years. The other was Judge Benjamin Castaneda himself, who was fined for filing his report late and for not attending every autopsy of the victims of the crowd crush. To the victims' families, this outcome did little to provide any closure. Following the disaster, a week of national mourning occurred, and the capacity of the stadium was reduced from 53,000 to 42,000. The Estadio Nacional has been refurbished and is still in use to this day, but there is no plaque or memorial to commemorate those who died in soccer's worst disaster. And for the families of the victims, many questions remain unanswered. Number 4. Victoria Hall. Parents anxiously walk among row after row of the dead. Mothers faint and fathers weep as they find their children among the bodies. In all, 183 victims, all of them children, tragically lost their lives at the Victoria Hall. All of this horrific loss, all of this sorrow, and all because of a magic show and a bolted door. It was an ordinary summer day in Sunderland, England, but to the children of the city, it might as well have been Christmas morning. A traveling entertainer duo known as the Fays were putting on a magic show at the Victoria Hall. For only a penny each, children were promised a show of conjuring talking waxworks, living marionettes, and something called the Great Ghost Illusion, as well as a chance at winning prizes like toys and books. The event was advertised as the greatest treat for children ever given, but this joyous event would soon turn into a scene of absolute horror. Almost all of the children in the city, around 2,000, crowded into the Victoria Hall to see the Fays magic show. They were excited by the toys and gifts promised in the ads, and with few adults in attendance, most of them were completely unsupervised. While it was only a penny for children to get admission to the show, it cost 3 pence for each adult, and many parents simply couldn't afford to attend with their kids. There was seating on the ground floor, as well as in the dress circle on the first floor and the gallery above. Children watched eagerly as the show began. The Fays performed a variety of conjuring tricks and illusions, delighting the young audience. Their excitement for the free toys it promised only grew as the performance came to an end. It was announced that children with certain numbers on their tickets would receive special prizes on the way out of the theater, and with that, the Fays began tossing out handfuls of toys and treats to the crowd on the ground floor. Excited and not wanting to miss out, children began to stream down the stairway towards the ground floor. As they scrambled through the halls and down the stairs, the crowd became so compacted that there was no more room for running, and instead they began to move slowly, shoulder to shoulder, in one large mass. At the bottom of this stairway, the exit door was bolted open inward by only 20 inches. This had been done to ensure only one child could pass through at a time, making it easier for staff to check tickets. But as the excited crowd of children rushed down the staircase, a choke quickly formed at the partially open door. The gap was not wide enough to cope with the flood of children, and it quickly turned into a death trap. One child tripped, then another, and another. Unaware of the pileup quickly forming in the narrow stairway, more and more children continued to surge forward. The laughter and excited cheers that once filled the hall quickly turned into cries of fear and pain. The Sunderland Echo had reported at the time. The heap of writhing humanity became higher and higher, until it became a mass of struggling and dying children over 6 feet in height. This image illustrates the height of the pile of bodies in the stairway by the end of the ordeal. Children were stacked on top of each other 20 bodies deep, and the weight of the packed bodies crushed and suffocated those at the bottom of the pile. William Codling, one of the survivors of the incident, recalled, "Suddenly I felt I was treading on someone on the stairs, and I cried in horror to those behind, 'Keep back, keep back!' It was no use. I passed slowly over and onwards with the mass, and before long, I passed over others without emotion." The first adult to notice the horrific events unfolding was the hall's caretaker, Frederick Graham. He could not open the door any further, as the bolt was on the children's side. He tried in vain to detangle children from the squirming, shrieking mass to pull them to safety through the narrow gap, but found the task impossible. He had to make the difficult decision to leave the children who were crushed at the bottom of the stairs, running up a different staircase and leading approximately 600 children to safety by another exit. With this act, he undoubtedly saved hundreds of young lives, but unfortunately, for many of the children at the bottom of the stairway, it was too late. This is a list of the victims and their ages. In the end, a total of 183 children between the ages of 2 and 14 lost their lives. Most died of compressive asphyxia as a result of the crowd crush. Many families lost 2 or more children that day, and tragically, an entire Sunday school class of 30 all passed in the disaster. Their battered bodies were laid out at the Mowbray Park Hotel, as well as in the park grounds, to await identification. A man and his wife anxiously scanned the rows of the dead. His face blanched, and without showing any further signs of emotion, pointed to a little figure. "That's one." A few yards later he pointed again. "That's another." Then as he came to the last child in the row, he lost composure and burst into loud sobs. "My God, all of my family, gone." Some of the children had been so badly crushed that there were cases of mistaken identity, including one parent who took home a boy only to later realize it was the body of a neighbor's child. In the meantime, his own boy was found apparently recovering, but later died in the hospital. Articles from the time gave graphic descriptions of the state of the children's bodies, including children with discolored, blackened, and swollen faces, children whose clothing had been torn off in the struggle, and children who were bleeding from the ears. The disaster sparked public outrage, with people from all over Britain demanding answers and someone to blame for the tragedy. While 2 inquests were held, no one was ever prosecuted for the bolting of the door that caused the deadly crowd crush. This tragedy did, however, lead to legislation that public entertainment venues must be fitted with a minimum number of outward opening emergency exits. This incident was also the catalyst for the invention of the push bar on emergency doors. Today, the Victoria Hall is long gone, destroyed by a German parachute mine in World War II. But the victims of the Victoria Hall disaster are immortalized in a memorial. A white marble statue of a grieving mother cradling her dead child was built with donations sent from all over Britain, including from Queen Victoria. It was later moved to a cemetery where it was vandalized and forgotten, but in 2002 it was returned to Mowbray Park, where a 140-year memorial service took place.